These, along with at least 8 other panels illustrating scenes from Catherine's life, were painted in the early 1460s for a now lost altarpiece, possibly intended for the Hospital of Santa Maria della Scala in Siena. Clothing is a dominant theme in both stories shown on the Cleveland panels. In the first, on the left, Catherine reaches for the religious habit presented to her by St. Dominic in a vision. And in the other panel, Catherine gives her mantle to a beggar who is in fact Christ in disguise. Today, I want to explore how this discourse on clothing is fundamental to the portrayal of Catherine's sanctity, and to argue that these scenes contribute to the series' overall characterization of Catherine as an ideal Dominican and an exemplary visionary. Further, I want to suggest that this emphasis on clothing marks Catherine as a model of female piety as well. As we will see, dress as a motif in the series also speaks to one of the larger themes of the exhibition that we've been talking about all day, the intense rivalry between the Dominicans and Franciscans in Renaissance Italy. I will begin with a bit of information about Catherine, who is the preeminent female Dominican saint. Her image graces several works in the exhibition, such as this beautiful panel by Gerardo del Fora, painted in the late 15th century, where Catherine is shown on the right. Born in Siena in 1347, the daughter of a cloth dyer, Catherine began a life of piety and contemplation as a child, and at 16 joined the Sisters of Penance, or Mantellate, a lay group associated with the Dominicans. After just 3 years of prayer and seclusion among the Mantellate, Catherine embarked upon a ministry to the poor and sick, spending much of her time at the Hospital of Santa Maria della Scala, located across the piazza from Siena Cathedral. She gained fame for the mystical visions she received throughout her life. Even more extraordinarily for a woman of her time, Catherine intervened by letter and in person in major issues in Italian and ecclesiastical politics, including church reform, war and peace, the return of the papal court to Rome, and the schism that broke out after the disputed election of 1378. She died in 1380 and was canonized in 1461 by the Sienese Pope Pius II. Today, she, along with Francis of Assisi, is one of the patron saints of Italy. In the Bodwin panel, she wears the black and white habit of the Dominican order that we've seen many times today, and holds several of her traditional attributes: a lily, indicative of her virginity, a crucifix, alluding to her devotion to the crucified Christ, and a book representing her writings. The Cleveland paintings once formed part of a larger series of scenes depicting episodes from Catherine's life, or vita. 10 surviving panels from this set have been identified, and in order of their probable original arrangement, these are St. Catherine invested with the Dominican habit, the mystic marriage of St. Catherine, St. Catherine giving her mantle to a beggar, St. Catherine exchanging her heart with Christ, the stigmatization of St. Catherine, St. Catherine beseeching Christ to resuscitate her mother, the miraculous communion of St. Catherine, St. Catherine dictating her dialogues, St. Catherine before the Pope at Avignon, and finally, the death of St. Catherine. So the panels most likely come from the Predella, or lateral band of scenes, below an altarpiece, and Donald Cooper did a wonderful job of explaining this sort of arrangement. Such an arrangement, as he was talking about, with saintly vita panels or narratives placed below a larger panel or set of panels, was typical in Italy in the mid-15th century, as seen here in some more Fra Angelico for Trinita, the Cortona altarpiece of 1432 to 34. And we'll look a little bit at the Cortona altarpiece later, because there is an important scene from Dominic's life that we'll return to here on the right, so keep it in mind. Now, as also Donal mentioned earlier, long after such painted ensembles were commissioned, many were removed, dismantled, and dismembered, their various parts sold to collectors, particularly in the 18th and 19th centuries. And such was the fate of the Catherine Vita panels, which, as we have seen, are now dispersed among several collections. Because the original work was divided in this way, art historians have not reached consensus as to its original form, location, and patron. What is somewhat more certain is the date of the panels. Because they depict Catherine with a halo, they were most likely painted after her canonization in 1461. And a plausible theory is that they were commissioned in anticipation of the Sienese Pope Pius II's visit to Santa Maria della Scala on March 24th of 1464. It is also worth noting that Giovanni's panels constitute the earliest surviving visual biography of Catherine. The very existence of such a series thus attests to a strong interest on the part of the unknown patron in proclaiming Catherine's sanctity and inserting her firmly within the hagiographic canon. Most of the art historical scholarship on these panels concerns the original format of that now lost ensemble or altarpiece. Far less attention has been paid to the role clothing plays in the meaning of the series, so that is the theme I wish to turn to now as we look at the Cleveland panels from the exhibition. On the first Cleveland panel that we've already seen, the saint kneels before a crucifix on an altar and is shown experiencing a vision of three saints, Dominic, Augustine, and Francis. Each presents the habit of his order to Catherine, who signals her choice by taking the lily proffered by Dominic. The fact that Catherine receives the habit via this mystical experience is in keeping with the tradition of similar visions of investiture in Dominican hagiography. According to the biography of Dominic recounted in Jacobus de Voragine's Golden Legend, one of Dominic's earliest followers, the Blessed Reginald of Orleans, was about to join the order when he became violently ill. Dominic prayed to the Virgin, who appeared both to him and to Reginald in a vision in which she healed the sick man and then presented him with the habit. This episode was illustrated on Dominic's sculpted tomb in Bologna, the Arca di San Domenico, seen in a beautiful mural in the exhibition. And here is the detail here where you can see the Virgin, the sick man, and she's sort of healing him with the hand on the forehead and presenting him with the habit at the same time. The scene also appears in the margins of the fantastic gradual, also on view in the exhibition. And you can see the same scene of the Virgin, the habit, and the sick, soon-to-be friar there. The Cleveland scene of Catherine receiving the habit also deliberately recalls the iconography of Dominic himself receiving the habit in a vision from the Virgin, as shown on the predella of the Cortona altarpiece that I showed earlier. Like Catherine, Dominic is shown as he receives his vision in a chapel and while at prayer. The Cleveland panel similarly makes it clear that Catherine's vision was the product of her ardent prayer life. In his 1374 biography of the saint, Catherine's confessor Raymond of Capua tells us that the vision was a divine response to Catherine's constant petition to God. Quote, "About this time, the desire with which this holy virgin had had of long time to put on the habit of Saint Dominic began to increase in her heart daily more and more, for the accomplishment whereof she ceased not by day or by night to offer up her humble prayers and supplications to Almighty God, who liked well of her request and sent her this strange and evident vision." Fervent prayer, ideally leading to such visionary experiences, was a central practice in Dominican spirituality, as exemplified by the well-known treatise De Modo Orandi, in which Dominic's 9 ways of prayer are described and illustrated. A facsimile of an early important manuscript of this treatise can be seen in the exhibition, and this is a detail here. One posture recommended in De Modo Orandi is prayer and genuflection before a crucifix. Thus, the fact that Catherine's vision takes place in a chapel, where Catherine has likely been kneeling in prayer before the crucifix just prior, aligns Catherine with Dominic. This ideological connection of Catherine to Dominic, a founding saint, is reinforced by the way Catherine is shown in this scene alongside Dominic, Francis, and Augustine, founders of the 3 most powerful religious orders in Renaissance Siena. Such a presentation hints that Catherine herself will be the founder of what would eventually become the 3rd order of St. Dominic. Now, to help us understand the significance of the idea of Catherine as a founding saint, it is useful to explain briefly the history of the Dominican 3rd order. And so here I've made a little sort of chart that explains the 3 basic ways to join the Mendicant orders. Now, this is a simplification just to make things easy for everybody. But Third-order mendicants were lay people who chose to be associated with the Dominicans, Franciscans, and other religious orders. They often met together to perform religious devotions and even commissioned important works of art for mendicant churches. They did not, however, take full vows of chastity and communal living, as did the friars, who comprised the first order. So the friars were the male, the first line, if you will, of spirituality for the mendicant orders. The nuns, who were considered members of the second order, who, of course, had to be female and also took vows of chastity but had to remain enclosed, unlike the friars, and that's an issue we'll return to later on. And then the third order, where you have lay people who can become involved in religious devotions but are not full-fledged, fully participating members of the order. While the Franciscans had established an official third order by the end of the 13th century, so fairly early on in history, lay groups associated with the Dominicans were much less organized until later on. The contemplative women Catherine joined at age 16, known as the Sisters of Penance, or Mantellate, were linked with the Dominicans in Siena, but not a formal third order group. After her death, however, Dominican leaders invoked Catherine as they established the official Dominican third order. The Dominican friar Tommaso Caffarini, a leader in the reform movement known as the Observance, which Trinita writes very beautifully about in the catalog, promoted the cult of Catherine by declaring her to be the founder of the Third Order for Women, which was not, in fact, established officially until 1405, 25 years after Catherine's death. By the end of the 15th century, the Dominicans had fully established Catherine as the would-be founder of their female branches. And this painting is an example of this idea. This is painting painted circa 1500 by Cosimo Rosselli, and it depicts Catherine as the mother of the second and third order Dominican women. So the group on the right, and there's a little bit of controversy about exactly who Catherine is presenting these various rules to, but generally speaking, it's believed that the second order is at her right and the third order at her left. The Cleveland panel's portrayal of Catherine's choice of order thus helps to position her ideologically as a fundamental part of the growth of the Dominican order. Unlike the Franciscans, who had Clare of Assisi as a female counterpart to Francis very early in their history, the Dominicans had no popular female saints at all until Catherine. The growth of Catherine's cult and the Dominican rhetoric portraying her as a founder thus evinces the rivalry between the two orders. Giovanni's panel, in fact, speaks directly to the fierce competition in Siena among these and other religious groups. In his biography of Catherine, Raymond of Capua, again, describes this vision in which Catherine chooses the Dominican habit. And he gives us some detail, but he does not specify the other religious orders offered as options for Catherine. Instead, he says that all the orders appeared to Catherine. Yet, in Giovanni's painting, all the orders are represented by only two saints besides Dominic, Francis and Augustine, founders of the two key rival orders to the Dominicans in Siena. Now, if you visited Siena, and this is sort of the tourist map of Siena that I've given you, you have seen the lasting evidence of the competition among these orders in the form of the massive churches erected at three opposite points near the city walls. So you have the Dominicans, and many people today, if you arrive by bus to Siena, you will drive past or be dropped off very close to San Domenico. So the Dominicans are here, the Franciscans are over here on the other side, and then you have the Augustinians over here. So each of them with their territory. Catherine's choice of order, signaled by her choice of clothing, therefore represents a key victory for the Dominicans in their battle over their two foremost rivals. This emphatic assertion of Catherine's Dominican identity via her selection of habit authenticates the visionary experiences illustrated in much of the rest of the series. Clothing plays a central role in another vision of Catherine's, shown on the second Cleveland panel. Here on the right, Catherine, now wearing the black and white Dominican habit, hands a garment to a disheveled, barely dressed man. And on the left, Christ appears to the kneeling saint in a vision, presenting an identical garment to her. Raymond of Capua's biography tells us that Catherine, after giving all of her clothing to a beggar, save, of course, for the minimal garment she required for modesty, received a vision of Christ returning the cloak she had given, which was now resplendent with jewels. In clothing the poor, Catherine completes one of the 7 acts of mercy, the good deeds promoted by the church and modeled on those described by Christ in Matthew chapter 25. The biblical passage concludes with Christ's statement, "That which you have done to the least of these, you have done to me." In Catherine's vision, these words are borne out explicitly as the beggar is found out to be Christ himself. Giovanni makes this connection clear by showing Christ handing Catherine a garment that is identical to the one she had given to the beggar, now, however, flecked with touches of gold paint, indicating the jewels described in the vision. And when you're upstairs, you have to look very carefully for the heavenly bling that is visible there. It's a rather subtle take on resplendent jewels, but it is definitely there. Appropriate for Catherine, of course. This repeated presentation of the black mantle, part of the Dominican habit, I should mention, very important, as well as the chapel-like setting, alluding to the community of the mantellate, also underscores Catherine's visionary life within the Dominican order. Raymond goes on to relate that after returning Catherine's clothing, Christ then dressed the saint in a red robe drawn out of the wound in his side. And this mystical garment kept her warm for the rest of her life. And I could use one of those today, actually. Christ then declared to Catherine, "This dress, with all it stands for, I give you as your own while you are still on earth. It is the sign and the pledge of the garment of glory with which, when the time comes, you will be clothed in heaven." Catherine's charitable donation of her clothing was thus rewarded with physical intimacy with Christ, who adorned her with fabric from his own body. Such an act of dressing by Christ was a metaphor for the salvation offered to all Christians via his flesh. The themes seen in this second Cleveland panel, renouncing earthly vanity for heavenly reward, as well as the way clothing becomes a material extension of Christ's body, occur with particular frequency in female hagiography. As historian Caroline Walker Bynum has argued, medieval and Renaissance writers believed women to be the weaker and more earthly sex, associating them with the human nature of Christ. Holy women were therefore often particularly devoted to Christ's body and its appearance in the Eucharist. The connection between clothing and the body of Christ can be seen, for instance, in the spirituality of Clare of Assisi, famous for her creation of corporals, or coverings for the consecrated hosts, effectively clothing for the body of Christ. Clare's rule also stipulated that she and her sisters wear the poorest of garments. In the exhibition, we can see this image of Clare, painted in Siena in the middle of the 14th century by the master of the Loser Madonna. Clare holds a lamp, an allusion to the meaning of her name, light or clarity, and with her other hand, she pulls her cloak around her body, drawing our attention to her humble attire. The modest dress of Clare and Catherine reflects their deliberate rejection of luxury in their quest for holiness. As art historian Cordelia Warr has pointed out, dress recurs as a motif in female hagiography with particular frequency, in part because women were seen as especially susceptible to the vice of vanity associated with fashion. Mendicant preachers, particularly those promoting the reform movement known as the Observants, vehemently railed against excess in clothing. Bernardino of Siena, the fiery Franciscan preacher and reformer, whose image you can also see in the exhibition, preached a sermon in which he denounced the luxurious dress of rich women, declaring that devils will cling to the long trains of their dresses as the women are tormented in hell. The fact that Catherine donated her own garments to a beggar aligns her with many other saints, male and female, most famously 2 male saints, Martin of Tours, here on the left, and Francis of Assisi, of course. And both of these are frescoes from the Basilica at Assisi. But in contrast to the public, outdoor acts of charity seen in typical images of male saints, such as these, Giovanni portrays Catherine's charity safely confined to a cloister-like space. This rendition of the episode thus conforms to the way female saints are more often shown performing acts of charity from within, or else very close to a hermitage or a convent. The Franciscan tertiary Margaret of Cortona, for example, is shown here in the act of distributing clothing to women, I might add, and we also see in these scenes of charity women often giving to women rather than giving to men, which I think is also very interesting. And here Margaret is shown, as you can see, completely covered up with sort of a little reed basket just popping outside of her cell to give away her clothing to the poor. As my essay in the exhibition catalog explains, church regulations and societal norms dictated that most female members of mendicant orders remain cloistered, living lives of prayer and contemplation, unlike their male counterparts, the friars, who became, of course, itinerant preachers. From Catherine's biography, however, we know that she did not remain strictly cloistered. She only spent 3 years living among the Mantellate before emerging to tend the sick and participate significantly in public life. But in the series of paintings that once included the Cleveland panels, her interior life is emphasized much more than her public acts of charity and political deeds. In the series, there is only one image of Catherine before the Pope to indicate her travels. And I might also mention that she's in an interior space, even as she's before the Pope, which is probably accurate, but she's always in an interior setting. And one only potential exception is here when she's exchanging her heart with Christ. She sort of levitates a little bit above the chapel, but it seems like she's kind of in the sky rather than in a piazza. So here we see, in other words, Catherine styled as a model female saint, one who is enclosed, and as she's enclosed as an ideal Dominican, receives an intimate physical vision as a reward for her personal piety and good deeds. In the 2 panels that likely followed the second Cleveland panel, so in the series, and again, we're missing pieces of the original ensemble, so we can't say with certainty that this is the exact order, but they're in the 2 scenes immediately following Catherine the Beggar. We have Catherine exchanging her heart with Christ, and we have the Stigmata. And in both of these episodes, the viewer witnesses the rewards Catherine received for her pious charity. And these rewards were dramatic, firsthand experiences of Christ's body. So again, physicality is the reward here. The most controversial of these episodes, of course, was that in which Catherine received the Stigmata, or wounds of Christ, in her flesh, similarly to St. Francis, as Trinita was saying earlier. Dominican advocates of Catherine's cult insisted on the veracity of the Stigmata for Catherine, but the depiction of the Stigmata in art was fraught with controversy. In 1472, Pope Sixtus IV, a Franciscan, went so far as to prohibit references to Catherine's Stigmata in sermons or in images. The conflict over images of St. Catherine continued even after Sixtus's edict was overridden and eventually repealed in 1599. Despite the debate, several works depicting her receiving the Stigmata or shown with the Stigmata survive by artists from her native city, such as that included in this series. Here, Catherine is shown in a chapel, kneeling before the crucifix, arms outstretched, mirroring the cross before her. Her black mantle is cast off behind her, and she is once again clad in white. There is no textual explanation for this detail. Catherine's clothing is not mentioned in Raymond of Capua's descriptions of her stigmatization. Neither is this motif typical in the few other depictions of this event. We can compare Giovanni's treatment of the Stigmata to that in a painting in the exhibition by a later Sienese artist, Domenico Beccafumi, and this is one of the can't-miss works to see upstairs, painted circa 1513 to 15. Here, in what appears to be a convent church, St. Catherine is branded by rays of light as she kneels before a large crucifix, observed by 3 of her Dominican sisters. While experiencing this vision, Catherine remains clad in her full Dominican habit. In the panel by Giovanni di Paolo, either Catherine herself has removed her black Dominican mantle in the presence of Christ, although she does not do so in the other visions shown in the series, or, which I personally think is the more likely explanation, the power of the vision has caused Catherine's cloak to fall away, leaving her dressed only in the white raiment seen at the beginning of the series. Once again, Catherine's clothing becomes a distinct marker of her exceptional mystical capabilities. The motif of clothing therefore functions as part of the series' overall characterization of Catherine as an exemplary mystic. In contrast to many traditional hagiographic depictions, she is not portrayed as a miracle-working saint. This preference stands in contrast to Giovanni di Paolo's slightly earlier series of panels depicting scenes from the life of Clare of Assisi. So again, comparing her to Clare, because one of the things this exhibition allows us to do very usefully. And this is one of the panels that you can see in the show, showing Clare of Assisi resuscitating a boy who has been mauled by a wolf. So she's performing, it's actually a posthumous miracle. 3 other panels from this same series survive, including one that's in the Yale Art Gallery, showing Clare's blessing of the lobes before Pope Innocent IV, and then 2 others that I don't have to show you here, but both also showing interesting miracle stories. One is St. Francis investing Clare with the habit, which is similar to what we saw with Catherine, and then the other is St. Clare rescuing the shipwrecked. So again, a miracle. Although we do not know how many additional scenes once formed part of the Clare set, it is clear that in it she is presented as a thaumaturge. This emphasis on Clare's miracle-working powers can be understood in the context of the Franciscan promotion of their new saint, Bernardino of Siena, who is also known for his posthumous miracles. The Franciscans chose to promote Clare in this particular way aggressively in Siena in the mid-15th century, the time when a female Dominican, Catherine of Siena, was under consideration for sainthood. That the patron of the Catherine series elected to promote Catherine as a very different kind of saint can be seen, I think, as a response to the Franciscans. The celebration of Catherine's contemplative life in the work that once included the Cleveland panels is therefore best explained as an assertion of her Dominican identity. Her portrayal as a visionary is consistent with the way the Dominicans represented their saints, beginning with Dominic himself. While the emphasis on dress, both the divinely sanctioned habit and as instrument of charity and then mystical rapture, associates her with a long tradition of female saints, it also aligns her firmly with St. Dominic, the founder of the order. The context for this altarpiece remains mysterious, but there is no doubt that Dominican interests, a strong Dominican patron, I would wager, and the rivalry with the other religious orders fueled such a portrayal of Catherine. In contemplating Catherine's relationship to clothing, viewers and patrons alike would have been encouraged to see the Dominican habit as a necessary prelude to the heavenly clothing the saint and perhaps they would eventually earn. Thank you. Questions?
I just wanted to mention, maybe you wanted to say a little more also, that typically white is associated with the ascension of Christ and also with the coronation of the Virgin when she goes to heaven. She is usually shown wearing white.
Yes.
And I was just thinking, looking at this, in a way, this painting is like her birth because she's joining this order, and then the second time is her anticipated rebirth after death.
Right. So lots of associations possible with the white, and I think particularly the connection to the Assumption is important for Siena because that's the cathedral's dedication, and there's an intense devotion in Siena to the Assumption of the Virgin. Questions?
Thank you. It's very enjoyable. The proportions of the women are way off, and they seem to get better, of course, as you go further through the centuries, but I presume that these artists would never observe a woman naked to do their paintings from. And also, it seems like they have absolutely no curves at all, and I presume that's intentional because they're pure.
Well, we are in the 1460s. We are. You could cite other examples. Botticelli is painting Birth of Venus. Around not too much later, but certainly, the case of Catherine, the context would not really be appropriate to show Catherine in any way, emphasizing her sexuality in that way. So I don't know. In terms of the first part of your question, I think it's something that I'm working on in my own work, sort of the notion of style mirroring meaning and content. And I think that there is definitely a sense of, wanting to portray her as, pure and, kind of otherworldly. And so perhaps some of the lack of naturalism you might observe is connected to that as well.
So Catherine seems to have a very strong presence within these orders. Was there any negative backlash to have this strong female character emerging in this artwork?
Well, what's kind of interesting, I think that's something that we might think, and I think it's knowing, sort of in reference to earlier discussions about tombs, how women were disregarded in medieval and Renaissance society so much. The interesting thing for me as a scholar of women in the period is that you have this contrast between the way we know women were treated in society and the elevation of saints and the Virgin to the very highest degrees of religious devotion. So I cannot think of any particular problem with Catherine being a woman per se. However, my colleague at Tulane, Tom Luongo, has written a wonderful book on Catherine. He's a historian, and he's worked on her dialogues and her writings and on Raymond's biography. And he notes, his argument in his book is that Catherine's politics were very much kind of downplayed in a lot of the writings about her, in favor of her kind of mystical capabilities and her, her sort of more typical virginal saintly attributes. And that is precisely what we see in Giovanni di Paolo's series. So in that sense, I think we might see the gendered aspect of her, of the view of her of the time.
Holly, hi. I want to thank you for bringing our attention to dress and cloth. But I want to perhaps suggest one might nuance it a little bit, because after all, white cloth is treated cloth, and it is not really poor cloth in the sense of the undyed, very rustic habit that St. Francis wore, which is purported still to be at Assisi, and one can see that. This is a rather refined cloth.
It is.
And so one needs to be a little careful, perhaps, in overemphasizing the simplicity and poverty of this costume, which really isn't so poor. And one might think of the Dominicans as echoing the habit of the Cistercians, white habits, right, but adding the black cloak, which obviously Catherine has here. But it's one of the features which really distinguishes the Dominicans very conspicuously from the much more rough, uncomfortable, and non-clerical habit of Clare and all the Franciscans, at least up to a certain point.
Yes. Well, and that is actually why I brought in, I didn't go on with the excellent explanation that you have about the differences in dress in terms of Dominicans and Franciscans. As part of my argument was about her being a Dominican in particular as well, and not just being humble and poor. But when I was talking about female, spirituality in general, and sort of the contrast between the luxurious dress of, say, rich women, the kind of the things that Bernardino was preaching against, and versus the monastic habit. So, but Clare of Assisi is definitely a better example, no question, which is why I brought her in, of humility and poor dress, to be sure.
Moving away from humility for a moment, but in regards to the first question about the clothing, am I mistaken in thinking I once heard that roughly during this time period there was a garment that women wore called a sideless surcoat that was nicknamed the Gates of Hell because men could see the form for the first time?
That I cannot answer. Perhaps there's someone here who can, but I'm afraid that is out of my realm of expertise. So.
Thank you.
Hello. I have a question about St. Catherine going out into the world and her, like this idea of like women becoming masculine, like St. Dominic going and doing the works of mercy. Do you think that contributed to her popularity?
Well, it's something people like to bring up because there actually is a passage that you may be aware of in Raymond of Capua's biography where she wants to, in her early career, she actually wants to go out and be a preacher. She wants to dress in the habit of the friars preachers and, go out and preach, which she doesn't end up doing. So, various scholars have wanted to, have sort of looked into that to see, but my answer, I guess, to your question is that whether that particular aspect would have raised her popularity, it's a little difficult to say. I mean, again, Catherine is very exceptional in a lot of ways because she's doing a lot of things and becoming celebrated for many things that most women were simply not allowed to do. So I think she's exceptional because, at least in terms of what I've studied in terms of her hagiography and the images, because she had this exceptional mystical life that was authenticated by the church, and that exceptional mystical life gave her the authority to go out and do the things that normally men would be allowed to do. So, so I think actually, in a way, her interior life and her visions and are what enabled her to become the exception to the rule, rather than any desire she might have to be male. If that makes sense.
St. Clair, is there any art that shows her writing a rule? She was one of the first or earliest to write a rule, setting the clothes aside for a minute, and also the clothes that we see her in the few pictures here, I don't think it would be at all, as you said, what she would have worn. So,
Claire, you mean, or?
Yeah, Claire. So if you tie those together, I mean, she was known for writing and saying she didn't want to own property and she wanted to have things. Is there any art that shows her ever?
I can't think offhand. There are many experts in the room, so perhaps others. I can't think offhand of an image of Claire writing at all. And again, there's questions of dictation and writing. There's the image here that I showed of Catherine dictating to her confessor her dialogues. So images of women actually, with pen in hand, are pretty rare, I would say, still in this period. Just go back to a little farther. And on terms of Claire's dress, I mean, to Professor Berzelius's point, I think that Claire probably did wear the garment that the picture I showed you of Claire would have been an extremely scratchy, wool, uncomfortable garment. And there's a lot in the biographical descriptions of Claire about how her habit was so ragged and she was so freezing cold and so sort of emaciated from fasting that at one point Francis even intervenes and says you have to eat because you're starving yourself. So Claire was an extreme ascetic, extreme. Right. So, but I don't know of any images of her writing.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks to all, and thanks for sticking with me for the end. Oh, we have one more question. Great, go ahead.
If there's time. It's so nice to hear you speak. I've read that so much religious art, especially during the medieval and Renaissance period, is very didactic. It's meant to teach a lesson to the viewers. And so I was just curious, who was the intended audience for these paintings of St. Catherine and how these paintings may have been teaching lay or sisters a lesson somehow?
It's a good question, and that's a big open question because, as I was saying, the Catherine panels were once part of something larger. There's been lots of art historical ink about the reconstruction. We have very, confusing documentary evidence, which is really, at the end of the day, inconclusive as to its original placement. And there was a long-standing theory that there was a painting now in the museum in Siena that was above it. So we don't know precisely who the audience would have been. Obviously, as I was arguing in my paper, a Dominican patron makes a lot of sense, and so one presumes some Dominicans in the audience as well. So a Dominican church or perhaps a confraternity, if it indeed was there in Santa Maria della Scala originally. There was a confraternity that met there and was particularly devoted to Catherine, sort of paying homage to the place where she did a lot of her charitable work with the sick. So it's possible that I think whatever the audience would have been, and it might have been a mixed audience. And I think indeed, sort of as Donal was saying earlier, for a lot of these churches, we can't even in places where we would assume only friars would have access. That is not. Scholars no longer really think that's a hard and fast rule, that there was a lot of permeability when it came to churches. So whatever the original audience was, I think it was mixed, likely. Lay friars, potentially confraternity members. So I think that the series to me is designed really to kind of universally proclaim Catherine as an authentic mystic, emphatically as a Dominican, and also as an ideal sort of visionary woman. So I think that those themes would have resonated with a lot of different audiences, actually, not simply a female audience or even simply a Dominican audience. All right. Well, thanks to all.